the #1 Costa Rica real estate and investment podcast, bringing you experts from all over Costa Rica.
Good morning, guys, and welcome to episode 167 of Costa Rica Real Estate and Investments with me, your host, Richard Beckson. Today, we're going to be talking with Frank Busch. We had Frank actually on the podcast probably around about 2 years ago. He's the managing partner for TLA Escrow Company. It's a Texas-based escrow company that offers US-style escrow services to Latin America. So we're going to be talking to Frank about how escrow works, his viewpoint on what's happening, because he's also in the Latin America and also North American markets. So kind of like what's going on in real estate, what's going on in the market, how Costa Rica is changing, and also his kind of opinion and advice when, investing in Latin America. So this is going to be an interesting one just because, again, his point of view is very unique. Remember, guys, if anyone is doing a project or thinking of doing anything in Costa Rica, feel free to reach out to us, info@investingcostarica.com. That's info@investingcostarica.com. A lot of you have reached out, even if you just want to say hello and how much you like the podcast. If there's a topic you'd like us to discuss, feel free to send it across to us. We'll be more than happy to see if we can cover it. And just again, the idea is to just get more and more information out there. As many of you know, we work on a variety of different projects from residential to commercial. We are helping people through due diligence. We're a pain in the butt because we like to make sure all our I's are dotted and T's are crossed. We have a unique viewpoint from everything from tourism to real estate to development to investing here in Costa Rica. So remember, you can contact us, info@investingcostarica.com. Don't be shy, guys. Anyway, enough from me. Let's get straight into the podcast. Good morning, Frank. How you doing?
Great to see you, Rich. Again, twice in 1 week.
Exactly, man. Exactly. It's as I said, I've been trying to get you on the podcast for a while. I know you guys have been very busy over there. I think the last time we did a podcast was probably 2 years ago.
I think it was at least 2 years ago. We were actually looking at it again. So thanks for having me.
Nah, not at all. Not at all. Well, the first question I always love to ask, Frank, is just to get again, you have visibility into the US, Mexico, and also Costa Rica. As some economies worldwide are kind of stalling. I mean, what do you see happening at the moment? And how is your business, what is the trend this year? Is it still pretty strong? How does it compare to 2019? Just give the listeners an idea of what you're seeing kind of happening in the market.
Yeah, I would say that 21, the second half of 21 and first half of 22 were all-time highs for many, many businesses, for lots of people, for M&A in the US. I mean, sort of globally, like real estate was obviously at massive highs because then the rates started to jump significantly in the summer of 22. Our business continues to be very strong in Costa Rica. It's strong in Mexico as well. I think you have seen that the high end of the US buyers and maybe Canadian buyers as well too, they have cash. I mean, people came away with a lot of cash from after COVID, during COVID, et cetera, if we're talking about foreign buyers. So we have continued to see strong interest in Costa Rica. The volumes have normalized, I would say. I thought that they would drop off more than they have, to be honest with you, and they have not. They've continued to stay strong. There's always a seasonality in our business, in just the sort of, when the season is for high time for people to buy. But overall, we've actually seen strength. We continue to invest a lot of resources in Costa Rica. We think that's just an incredible market for us. But Mexico has seen strength as well. So I wouldn't say that. We have, just so you know, we have a big project in Belize that has been slower and more muted, but that's mostly because of the project itself, and there's just not nearly as much going on there. We have a couple different things that we're working on in Panama, Honduras, and Nicaragua, but those are much, much smaller overall for us than Costa Rica and Mexico.
I mean, if you were to create a pie chart of what percentage of your business, say, is Costa Rica versus Mexico and these other countries, what would it look like?
Yeah, today it's about 65 to 70% Costa Rica. So that is a really big shift for us in the last 4 years from what was dominated. The business was dominated by Mexico. There are a whole lot of reasons, I think, for that. But honestly, I just think, that's what our business looks like today. I could go into lots of different reasons as to why I think it's changed, but It's meant that we've continued to invest in making sure that we are at the top of our game in Costa Rica and want to continue to stay there. And there's plenty of market share to gain for us there. So
if you were to compare 2009, you said that it's kind of normalized, but if you were to compare 2019 to 2023, do you think that it's a lot higher than 2019?
In terms of my business or just overall in transaction volume?
Yeah, I mean, in transaction volume, your business, just to give people an idea, because I think what everyone's trying to get an idea at the moment is, okay, we had this craziness like of 2021, 2022. Now 2023, like things are starting to normalize. We're seeing it in tourism data. We're starting to see it somewhat potentially in real estate transactions, but how does that compare to what normal is? Because really normal was 2019. So how does it compare to 2019?
Here's what I think happened, and I don't think this is slowing down. COVID hits, work from home, work remote, all of that takes off, right? And so people all of a sudden were able to go move and do work wherever they wanted, right? Whether it was places in the United States, was it places abroad. I think Costa Rica and Mexico both benefited from that. There's no question. But Costa Rica obviously is a much smaller country than Mexico, and it's also a lot further behind in terms of where the overall development was, bringing in just sort of tourists. I mean, mainstream tourists or high-end tourists, and so that wanted to have a second home, or that were considering a second home, or even moving. So I do think that COVID lit the fuse on, it blew up really. The fuse was lit, and then it really blew up. But I think what happened is now you've seen people, whether they're doing work from home, work remote, half and half, whatever, people are certainly able to be more flexible in their sort of working, deal. And Costa Rica was discovered. It's not like it was not discovered before, but I feel like it's been discovered in a much different way now, just based upon anecdotally conversations I have with people in the United States. Mexico was already there. There was no question it was already there. Additional developments took off in Mexico. I mean, you see a lot of action in Cabo, especially on the East Cape. You've seen more north of Puerto Vallarta, north of Punta de Mita in Mexico. But all up and down the Pacific coast in Costa Rica, I feel like has just, it's like everybody knows about it. Now, to a certain extent, more places than others, right? Of course, as you can imagine. But that trend, I don't see stopping. And that's what's really interesting is it's like, okay, it became discovered because a lot of people moved to other places. But I think that actually has real staying power in that now you hear people in the United States and you see tourism magazines and you see other things talking about the wonders of Costa Rica that, and you put that against the backdrop of some of frankly, the violence and the cartel action in Mexico. I think it's just become more and more, it's snowballing. I mean, I think the snowball effect is real, and I think will continue to roll for Costa Rica. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, look, if the demand continues, the suppliers can never keep up really in Costa Rica. It's very difficult to develop here, as we both know. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting over the next, kind of year, 2 years to just see what happens here. Because I'm seeing exactly the same thing that you are, which is that, like, again, pre-COVID was a lot of retirees, kind of looking at Costa Rica, snowbirds, those kind of things. But now we've got more people, families moving here. Like, it's now a location where people are looking to relocate.
It doesn't, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I mean, it really became much more mainstream as a destination than I think it was before, and consequently mainstream as a destination to look at, for second homes and or complete relocation.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, we get Elon Musk's Starlink, this month. So something must be going right.
That's right.
So, well, let's change gears a bit and talk actually about escrow. I think it's great to get your viewpoint on kind of what's happening in the market. But like a lot of people, actually the other day, I'm working with a client at the moment where he was like, hey, the realtor sent me across the document, which basically says I got to deposit, $17,000 directly into the seller's account. We were like, no, like you need to use escrow, dude. So, I mean, when should people use escrow and when shouldn't they when buying in Latin America? Because I'm sure that you've like had a lot of experience in this, but like just to educate people is like, when should they use it? What is it? And, kind of what are the advantages of working with you guys?
Yeah, I would say generally speaking, escrow is growing throughout Latin America, whether it's foreigners transacting or non-foreigners transacting. Before, escrow is a very American, kind of concept. But we just provide a third-party service where it's, we can help assure the dollars are going to the right place between the buyer and seller. And candidly, the realtors like it more than anything because it makes sure their commissions get paid from.
It's great.
That's a huge part.
It protects everyone.
It protects everybody. It really does. And it protects whether it's deposits that are going in on the front end as earnest money or deposits that may be used for development dollars for a developer. It protects all of those things. And so we've seen, the growth, I think, in the demand. What we're starting to see is all of the major areas are familiar with the concept, right? Major areas throughout Latin America, but let's just talk Costa Rica, very familiar with it now. But you're starting to see smaller areas that maybe did not use it and still were sending direct deposits to sellers, for example. Or even some realtors would handle it, which I think is a big no-no, generally speaking. For a realtor, you don't want any of that. At the end of the day, you just want you want a successful sale and to obviously get paid for work. So I think we're starting to see it catch on in areas that just, frankly, we're kind of further behind, probably is a good way to describe it in terms of the overall transaction processing.
I mean, I had to educate a seller the other day on escrow and what it is, but a lot of people, again, Costa Ricans aren't used to escrow. It's usually they sit down at a table, a cashier's check or a money transfer happens, and that's how, it happens. But then as the buyer, I'm like, there is no security that I have that when we get to the closing table, that the property's still going to be for sale because someone else could just come in and buy it. If I have a sales purchase agreement that says we're buying this and closing in 30 days, I'm doing my due diligence, and the money sits in escrow knowing that here's my commitment. Seller, you can see the commitment. It just keeps everything a lot cleaner and smoother.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. I don't disagree. Historically, you've seen, domestic transactions in Mexico, Costa Rica, most other Latin countries are done exactly the way you just described, or some variation of that, where there isn't an escrow company involved. But I think what we've seen with the growth of obviously foreigners buying in these countries is they're very used to it, right? It's the only way that really real estate gets transacted in the United States is with, generally speaking, title insurance and an escrow company providing services, intermediary fiduciario services. But you're starting to see it more and more, and people are just understanding, the benefits of it. Even, frankly, domestic, just purely domestic transactions where you don't even have a foreigner involved. We're handling some of those now at this point. And the other thing that's, I would just say to jump ahead on your question, what's really happening right now in our world that is scary, hot button, whatever you want to call it, is cyber fraud. The cyber fraud stuff has been real for years and years and years. But every day these thieves wake up and are trying to figure out how to be one step ahead of the game. And what has happened the most, no question, is that people who do not have dual authentication on their email servers, or do not have, if you're just using Gmail, if you're just using, Yahoo or AOL or whatever it is, it's very, very, very easy to hack for these guys. And so consequently, and by the way, these thieves know who the people are that are transacting. They're not looking for the buyer and the seller who may do a one-off deal. They're looking at the real estate agents. They're looking at the lawyers. And so I would say that the real estate agents are the most vulnerable because, generally speaking, the lawyers have obviously confidentiality duties and oftentimes are investing more from what I see in the IT systems and in security of the IT systems versus, as well as I do, you can show up in Costa Rica and there's many people that become real estate agents and, there's no licensing, it's nothing. It's just a sort of, so I oftentimes try and caution the real estate agents and say, look, you should just assume that your email's hacked. You should absolutely assume that your email's hacked every day. And until you invest or you figure out how to make sure that, you're working with an IT company and you're investing the dollars to do that, you should assume that you're hacked. And so you're my thoughts to you, that you should be talking to your clients about, whether you represent the buyer or the seller, is look, we need to be extremely diligent about where and how we are sending out any wire instructions, or you're wiring any money to any wire instructions, because that is where we are finding the sort of the biggest weakness spot. And we've thwarted a number of cyber attacks this year already, or essentially fraud attempts is really what it is. And so that's probably the biggest area that I would just caution people. We saw it 10 or so years ago in the US. I mean, this is something that title companies got burned on, realtors got burned on, because it was the same thing. The realtors in the US are doing the same thing. I mean, there's a bunch of them that have Gmail accounts and Yahoo accounts, and that's okay. I mean, look, I'm not telling them they need to go invest thousands of dollars in IT security that they may not have, or that may not be feasible or practical. Look, they should, but that's my take on that. Cyber fraud is very, very insidious.
Well, I mean, it's pretty easy to just put two-factor authentication on something that you have to, like, okay, you might need to put an authentication code in every so often, but like, or an SMS kind of, code. I get it all the time of like, hey, Microsoft single sign-on. Hey, please, change your password here. And I'm like, come on, man, I haven't requested anything. Like if I haven't personally requested something, I just ignore it and delete it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. Cyber fraud it's incredible. It's insane, So, I mean, people have options when it comes to using escrow. Okay. I think you guys are in a unique position than some companies here in Costa Rica. I mean, what is the main advantage of using TLA over, say, a local escrow company?
Yeah, so we're not regulated by Suhef. That's first and foremost. We have, in fact, written a letter to Suhef. We've hired counsel in Costa Rica, and we have a letter from Suhef saying, based upon your business model, you don't have bank accounts here in Costa Rica, you don't have offices, you don't have employees, you are not required to be regulated by Suhef. Okay, great. And that to us is really, really important in terms of helping facilitate transactions with foreigners that, look, if a Costa Rican escrow company or a bank in Costa Rica asks, a foreigner for bank statements, tax returns, very, detailed personal information as it relates to trying to figure out source of funds, that can often be a massive turnoff for buyers that are foreign, because that is not how things are done in the United States. It's how things are done in Canada. And so for us, I think part of the reason that we've really taken off is that we're able to let's say it's a transaction between two Americans, an American developer and an American buyer. Our level of due diligence as it relates to, what we have to do, and we're regulated by the Texas Department of Banking. So we have pretty massive regulation compliance in the United States that we have as it relates to insurance and net worth and surety bonds and reporting and anti-money laundering. It's a mini banking regulation sort of regime that we have to comply with here, which is substantial. So, but at the same time, the KYC is much more minimal. It's US-style KYC. So it makes it much easier for us to be able to handle those transactions without, I think, sort of scaring off buyers. I mean, that's really what we heard from both buyers and agents and lawyers, is that they get scared off by it. Now, at the same time, we've really adapted to make sure that in cases where there's going to be money going to Costa Rica, and that's a lot of our transactions now. I mean, it's probably 35 to 40% of those deals. Oftentimes it may be just commission dollars or lawyer payments going. Sometimes it may be a payoff if there's a Costa Rican seller, which could be a much larger amount of money that goes in. We have tailored our due diligence requirements to make sure that if there is, the last thing that we want to do is have funds sent to Costa Rica, and those funds cannot be liberated from a Costa Rican account to get to a seller or to get to a real estate agent. Those are all bad. So we've really tailored our due diligence requirements as it relates to KYC for these buyers. If we know that there's going to be some money going to Costa Rica, we sort of know that up front. We tailor those things. And the other thing is, we really tell the buyers, look, guys, you're sending this stuff to us on our servers in the US. It's held in, here's all the systems and the IT stuff we've invested in. It's confidential. It's not going anywhere. It's not going to be shared with anyone, other than if we need to use it to liberate some funds with a bank in Costa Rica, we'll share with them, but you have to know that going in up front. So that's that's kind of what the landscape looks like for us today. Is it's very minimal KYC. If there needs to be enhanced due diligence, which is what we'll call it, I think we make it really easy and confidential for for the buyers to provide that to us.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because a lot of the time I have clients where we do multiple deals together or are like, Rich, can we please use TLA? Like just the due diligence, like they've used an escrow company here in Costa Rica. And I'm always like, guys, they're going to want to know what your shoe size is and like, what your waist, like they go really deep on stuff because again, as you mentioned there, Suhef, which is like our SEC here, requires them to go that deep for anti-money laundering. Whereas again, if you use some, like TLA is that like you're in the US, the money is in the US. It's just staying in the US. So the requirements are different and a lot lighter, especially for US citizens. So you just need to, I think that the seller or the buyer needs to know of like, look, extra documentation is going to be probably requested and required by the banks here. Because as soon as they receive, I don't know, $100,000, they're like, dude, where did this come from? And you're like, well, it's this real estate transaction. Okay, show me source of those funds.
The other thing that I would say that we've gotten down to now is we've done so many of these deals with all the Costa Rican banks. And so lots of them have many, satellite offices all over the place. And some of those satellite offices, frankly, they all kind of act independently in many ways as it relates. We have to kind of go over this, but we've got letters from our bankers in the US. We've gotten on the phone with them. We have had $0 held up now in Costa Rica banks. And I can say probably the last year, we have not had any issues getting anything liberated. And part of it is our process of kind of maybe collecting some of this due diligence on the front end if we know the money's going to go. But the other piece is we've just gotten very used to knowing exactly what the Costa Rican banks want to know and want to see. Granted, they all may have a little bit of different take on what they want to see sometimes. But generally speaking, it's like, look, we got our little checklist. And 98% of the time, it's we're going to be able to get those funds liberated very quickly without any sort of additional like hassle that nobody's even going to know that was happening behind the scenes.
Yeah. What are fees for escrow, Frank? People always like to go, well, how much is escrow going to cost me?
Yeah, so our fees, I mean, I think we're quite reasonable compared to what our competition is. We started $1,000 in Costa Rica. For larger transactions, they'll run up, but we don't charge a percentage of deals. And generally speaking, in every transaction, most of our clients a lot of them split it. It may be split between buyer and seller. Obviously, that's all negotiable how those fees are worked out. But generally speaking, we're charging $1,000 per file, and that's really all that kind of. If there's a whole lot of wires or there's a whole lot of extra work, yeah, I mean, that may be different, but it's that's basically where we're at.
Yeah, very affordable. I mean, whose side is escrow on during the transaction?
Neither side. We are Switzerland, and we tell people that all the time. Our job is to be impartial. We are a third party. We have fiduciary duties to both sides, and so we don't represent buyer. We don't represent seller. We don't represent the people that send us. Generally speaking, the people that refer lots of work to us. It's a developer client, which would be a seller. It's lawyers. It's real estate agents. Even though they refer a bunch of work to us and they're primarily the people that we get our business from, we tell them very, very clearly, guys, we don't represent you and we don't represent anybody else in this transaction in, sort of more than one of the others. Our job is to make sure that we act as a third party, independent fiduciary and make sure that the deal gets closed. And in the event that there's a dispute, we have to figure out what to do with that as well, too, which is never pleasant for us, never pleasant for anybody. But at the same time, that happens, and that's the nature of our business. And we've been doing it for a long time and understand certainly how to kind of navigate those waters when things come up as well.
I mean, you guys are literally just following the sales purchase agreement. Like what it says in that is like, we are following that. Like that's what you guys have instructed us to do. Both parties have agreed to do that. That's what we're following.
Right. That's right.
So
we're not. Yeah. I mean, we have no dog in the hunt, right? We're not making more money or making less money or anything else. We're just trying to make sure that what the parties agreed to is what they're going to get.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some of the major challenges that you think are ahead for Costa Rican real estate?
Look, I think the challenges ahead, one is infrastructure. I think that there's just challenges around infrastructure, generally speaking. We've talked about things like water, roads, municipal infrastructure. I mean, I think all of those things, as I've toured around the country in the last year to 2 years, there are places that are super in demand and that just don't have the infrastructure. There's a lot of places like that.
Yeah.
And I'm not even talking about airport infrastructure, right, at this point. I mean, so those are not necessarily specific to, they're specifically impacting real estate. I think the other thing is pricing has just there's been a real run up in pricing. Now, that's part of that was COVID, right? All of a sudden you just have a lot of people looking for property, looking for, for opportunities where they can buy, and you don't have inventory. So part of it is that's just sort of run up there. I do think that we're in a recession here in the United States in real estate. There's no question. Some places are faring better than others. I sit in Dallas, Texas. That's where I live. The state of Texas, the state of Florida, the state of Arizona, they've all been beneficiaries of migration from COVID, from higher tax jurisdictions in places like California and consumer is going to be impacted. It's been a real estate recession because of rates, because rates just jumped, they doubled and in some cases tripled depending upon, what you're doing. So I do think the consumer is going to be impacted. I just don't know how much of that is going to impact ultimately people, ability to buy in Costa Rica, which is generally speaking happening in all cash.
Yeah.
And so, as things get sucked out of as cash gets sucked out of the system, and there was obviously incredible stimulus, trillions and trillions of dollars in the United States alone, you're sucking out cash because student loan payments are having to be made again. You're sucking out cash because, profits are just not as high. People are not making money in real estate as much anymore because, low rates meant that they could go out and, sell high and then just go buy again and with essentially very low rates. So I think that those are all things that I would say could impact real estate there.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting the next couple of years, kind of what happens here, because, typically we are 12 to 18 months behind you guys. So, but like our market is different here. I mean, you mentioned that like the infrastructure slows development, which means that the supply is not, there's not an abundant supply and you can't create it really quickly. And especially like in areas like Guanacaste, where the water infrastructure is just not there to develop a new subdivision or develop condos, those things. So, I think as long as tourism numbers stay strong, which they appear to be, we're moving cyclical, that demand is still going to continue to be there. And again, it's going to be very interesting. I don't think we're going to see this drop off that we saw in like 08, 09. But I think there's definitely going to be a slowdown and some price adjustments, especially in areas that aren't key areas, main key areas. So.
I think that, this is a little bit anecdotal and this is me reading the tea leaves, but I do think that Costa Rica has become the darling of Latin America for tourism. I absolutely believe that the snowball is just going to continue to roll down the hill, which is great news, I think, for people there. I think, but I think that's happening. I think that it's going to give a much larger country like Mexico. It's already giving Mexico a run for its money in terms of just look at some of the really high-end stuff that's happening in Papagayo and Discovery Land and the Wall Astoria project and other things that are going on in Tamarindo, not to mention things in Manuel Antonio and that sort of part of the country. That was not happening. That wasn't going on 4 or 5 years ago in the same way that it is today, not even close. So that just generates buzz. It generates buzz in publications amongst tourism, a world you understand probably better than I do, but you can see it out there now. And I think that people's eyes are opening in ways that they never were before. And I really do think it's become the darling sort of Latin America. And the more accessible it can be from being able to fly there and get there, will only increase that. So,
yeah. I agree. I think we're just getting started. I always say to people, like, find the most expensive room in Costa Rica and compare it to Mexico and Hawaii. Like, we're still somewhat cheap for high-end travel.
Yeah.
I
agree.
So, well, my last question for you, Frank, is I've kept you long enough. If you inherited $500,000 and had to invest it in business or real estate in Costa Rica, what would you invest it in?
That's a good question. I've been thinking about this. You sent it to me the other day. I think that I would, I'd be investing in Guanacaste because of the airport. And I don't know exactly where and what development or what I would buy or how I would buy, but I'd be investing, probably in and around real estate or real estate services businesses in Guanacaste. So that's my honest answer.
I had one this morning, which was, there is no company that I know that can really inspect septic tanks and leachy fields. I know it's not a clean business, but like no one's doing that down here. So all these home inspections are happening. People are buying these things and like just having faith that their septic tank and filtration system, their leachy fields are fine. Again, not the most beautiful of businesses, but like there's a business there.
I think there's a lot of businesses that can be done that like that. The other thing that I actually thought about the other day was self-storage.
Yep.
And it wouldn't just necessarily be in Costa Rica, but I think the idea is, and we're invested a lot in the self-storage businesses in the United States and self-storage properties, so I understand it pretty well. But I do think that there's opportunities to service that growth that's happening, whether it's inspection of sewage tanks, or think about other contracting businesses that people need, that isn't necessarily just general home construction or general pool construction, which, there's lots of people that do that. And I think some good ones that do that. Can you improve upon that? Yeah, of course. But think about some of the little side lights. You very much could be onto that. So, all right, let's find one and I'll put money into it.
Well, Frank, I always love to start a new business. So my guys in my office sometimes are like, oh, what's it this week, Rich? Anyway, really appreciate you coming on the podcast, chatting with you. I'll put all of your contact details as well as TLA's details in the contact description down below. But again, really appreciate your time, buddy.
Okay. Thanks so much, Richard, for having me on.
Awesome.
Take care. All right. See ya.
Ciao. Guys, great podcast there with Frank. I hope you enjoyed that and also his viewpoint, which again, I said is very unique at the beginning because again, he is in the US real estate investment market and also in Latin America, Mexico, Belize, Honduras, Costa Rica, Panama. And just his viewpoint is very unique of kind of what's happening in Latin America and also, sitting up there in the US in that world of investing in real estate and looking kind of, I would say, south here to Costa Rica. So, I would always suggest that people use escrow. I've done some deals here in Costa Rica directly with more Costa Ricans here, with just being kind of check at time of sale. It's very nerve-wracking, to be honest with you guys, because you don't know whether the deal was actually going to happen or not. And I'm sure a few people listening to this podcast have been through that process as well. So always suggest escrow. I spent quite a bit of time sometimes, educating sellers on what escrow is, how it works, and also how it protects them. So, but anyway, again, guys, if you need anything here in Costa Rica, want some advice or just want to chat, you can reach out to us, info@investingcostarica.com. That's info@investingcostarica.com. We're actually helping quite a few of you relocate to Costa Rica, which is something that I never thought we'd get into, but love doing it just because there's a lot of kind of emotion and smiles and beers and fun kind of doing it as well. We also do the investment side, but we're able to kind of cross both those things because sometimes, nobody wants to make a bad investment in Costa Rica and we constantly think about the exit. But you can contact us, info@investingcostarica.com. If you've liked this podcast, guys, please give us 5 stars, pass the pod, share it. It's just great to get that information out there and you just never know. So anyway, until the next podcast, guys, appreciate you listening, appreciate the support and have a great week.
The #1 Costa Rica real estate and investment podcast, bringing you experts from all over Costa Rica.